So I'm posting this video as a response to a user I have interacted with in the past. It's been at least a year or two since I've responded to a video of the user formerly known as Nicotine2, now known as ContraPoints. Um, and, before I even begin, I need to acknowledge the frame in which our conversation is taking place, the medium through which we are able to communicate with one another. And you know, nicotine or ContraPoints video was about the way that the images we consume shape our ideologies, shape our worldviews. And YouTube, I think, as Marshall McLuhan might describe it, were he alive today, kind of swallows the media technologies which existed prior to it. So the television, radio, electronic, the first forms of electronic communication prior to the internet are swallowed by YouTube. The printed book is swallowed by YouTube in the way that, before recording this video, I was reading The Romantic Conception of Life, and not only that, but, all the books in my library, and I was processing them for many years and am processing them as I speak to you and record this video, which is a form of intellectual creation. Somehow it's meant to be a representation of all that I have consumed prior to this virtual meeting of our faces in cyberspace. And ContraPoints had a lot of interesting points. I got excited towards the end of the video because ContraPoints was beginning to step outside of this very shallow confrontation between science and religion, where they become sort of polarized in this absolutist way. ContraPoints was recognizing the ideology at work in both of these worldviews, these attitudes toward the universe. He was recognizing the underlying similarity between these two ideologies, between what we could call scientific materialism on the one hand and Christian religiosity on the other hand. Both have their own form of theology, and as ContraPoints was describing it, the theology of the scientist is this way that they will praise and prostrate before the beauty of the universe as it is depicted by, for example, the Hubble telescope. The scientist, the secular, materialistic scientist, like, let's say like Richard Dawkins, will, in the same sentence, praise the beauty and the harmony and the complexity and the order of the universe at an aesthetic level, while in the next sentence, in the next breath, condemning it as an injustice and an amoral, if not also immoral, process. And Dawkins will talk about the human being, the human spirit, though he doesn't use that language, being that form of life which can rebel against its selfish genes and finally make a moral choice, a free choice in a world that is otherwise uncaring, and in fact rather savage, rather unjust, rather vicious. And this contradiction woven into the substructure of Dawkins' conscious beliefs about the world is drawn from his Christian context. The history of the development of the scientific mentality in Western Europe is from the beginning, it took place within the womb of Christendom, within the womb of at first the Catholic Church, and then the sort of secularized form of Protestant uh, religiosity. It wasn't until the Protestant Reformation that the sort of still enchanted Catholic worldview of nature as an organic whole could be broken down into a mechanistic picture. So with the Protestant Reformation, the human spirit recoils upon itself again. A deeper form of interior reflection becomes possible, such that the human mind no longer takes for granted its embeddedness in a meaningful, uh, hierarchically structured cosmos that has been designed from the beginning of time, from before the beginning of time, by an intelligent creator of some kind. With the Protestant Reformation, all of a sudden, we become individual singularities. The mind becomes cut off from the larger universe, and it becomes, in one way, a depraved sinner who can only achieve a sense of redemption through the grace of God. And there's nothing the human can do to redeem themselves from their fallenness because we are ignorant. We lack the capacity of our own motivation and our own transformation to know the truth. So with the sort of Kantian revolution in philosophy following the Protestant Revolution in religious practice and theology, we have this sort of skeptical epistemology where the ego is alienated from its own body and from its body's experience of its aesthetic perception of the surrounding universe. The ego, the intellect, can no longer know the world, but according to its own categories, but according to the structure of the thoughts that it has immediately available to it. The intellect can never know that which is on the other side of the mediation of the senses. The intellect can never know in this Kantian, from this Kantian perspective, what the world itself is doing, or what the world itself is in itself. And it seemed to me that at times ContraPoints was trying to defend this sort of Kantian perspective that the beauty of the world, its sense of being an ordered harmony and an ordered whole, is a product of the concepts of our own mind and our own perceptual systems, our nervous systems, and our culturally inherited linguistic systems, and the concepts that our language allows us to sort of section the world off into, section our experience of the world off into. And, I would want to go a step beyond what I perceive to be beyond Kant. Because rather than instill this duality between appearance and reality, or between the knowing subject and that which is known, the thing in itself, I would want to really invoke evolution, the evolution of the universe, which, the evolutionary cosmology that has come to the fore in the 21st century, come to the fore of the sciences in the 21st century. The 21st century is rooted in this idea that the universe has a common origin, and that through various irreversible mutations, transformations of the form and structure of itself, the universe became more complex, more folded upon itself, and that everything is somehow related. Everything emerged from a single point, whether we're talking about all of time and space and matter and energy, or we're talking about the species which we currently see arrayed upon the surface of the earth. All forms of life on the earth came from a single origin, a single initial form of life, an type, you might say, an archetype um, just as all forms of matter came from some as yet, not well understood unity of uh, quantum energy that then differentiated into the various forces of contemporary physics. Um, and I think this evolutionary hypothesis makes us, or forces us to realize that, for example, the phenomenon of color, we could skeptically describe it as a subjective projection that my organism and my culture provide me with the material out of which color is constructed. That color has nothing to do with the world independent of my own subjectivity, my own activity in the world as an organism and a mind. But on the other hand, before there were green leaves or colorful flowers, a blue sky, there was a light. And, you know, before the sky and before the organism with the eye to see the blueness, there was light. And light is responsible both, it plays a role in this process of refraction that gives, initially makes the possibilities of blueness possible. Or available, the possibility of the perception of blueness available to an organism, which of course has to evolve over time. But in many ways, or we could say that light is responsible for the evolution of the eye, that light came first, and that if light was not somehow mimicked by the eye, if there wasn't the likeness of light in the eye, that I couldn't see the blue, that I wouldn't perceive color, so that color wasn't just, or isn't just today, a subjective invention of my own physiological organism, but rather my physiological organism is embedded with the atmosphere of the earth and with the sun and the larger solar system in such a way that the light produced by the sun was always already involved in that evolutionary process that gave rise to my physiology, that my biological eye is in fact a co-creation of the light that was there prior to it. Photons evolved in the history of the universe prior to eyes, so you could say that the eye is a later relative of the photon. And reverse it and say that photons are an earlier form of sight. That the universe has always been, sensory in some way. That aesthetics isn't just something humans are able to contemplate. The beauty of a thing, the way that it appears to us, but that appearance has been part of reality from the beginning. This is, if we are to avoid a story of the miraculous emergence of consciousness and interiority and sentience at some point along the evolution of life, when the nervous system became complex enough, in terms of a measurement of how many neurons there are to give rise to experience and consciousness. If we're to avoid that kind of a miracle emergence from nothing, I think we have to root experience and sensation and the capacity to have the world appear. We have to root that capacity deeper in the process of materiality and material organization itself. We have to root it so deep that it even goes prior to the emergence of life, of what we think of as living organization, that even atoms and photons have an interiority, have a psychic or a mental component or aspect. Because otherwise we're left with this sort of contradictory picture where, as Dawkins seems to always want to describe it, the human is a moral, free creature capable of intelligence and good action, whereas the universe out of which it emerged is completely amoral, blind, mechanical, and deterministic. to avoid that kind of a dualism, which is it's an inheritance of our whole Western conception of the world, whether we call it materialistic or Christian. These ways, these dichotomized ways of understanding the world have always been part of the same matrix, that we call Western, European, and Anglo-Saxon consciousness. Unless we think of the universe itself as something alive, which has also been a current running through Western philosophy from the very beginning, then we're left with this dualism. We have to understand the universe itself as intelligent, and that the miracle of modern science is that it has made the universe intelligible. And what religion has been saying from the beginning is that the intelligible must be intelligent itself. So whereas the scientist can only say, I am intelligent, I know the world in this logical way, I can understand its processes according to these concepts and systems of thought. But the world itself is, because intelligible, not necessarily itself intelligent. The scientist denies the intelligence of the thing in itself, of that which is outside their own mind. Whereas the religious person says, no, my mind came from this more original intelligence, that my mind now is able to reflect and mirror within itself today, so that the human becomes a derivative of the cosmos, that the cosmic intelligence is the source of our own conscious, reflective, rational capacity, and that our aesthetic capacities are also emergent, derivative products of the universe's primary beauty and beauty-making or poetic capacity. I think ContraPoint ended his video by saying that the universe is basically empty space, and that therefore these moralistic conceptions of the universe as a good place created for a reason sort of misconstrue the facts of the matter. But we have to ask ourselves, I think, what space actually is. Is it just an empty void? Apparently not. Apparently it's seething with an infinite supply of energy. And when we look at an image of a galaxy, ContraPoints points out, I think, important in such a way that it is really revealing to us that these pictures from Hubble of galaxies, of Andromeda, let's say, are beyond anything the human eye was evolved to be capable of perceiving. So we have to construct the image in such a way that our eye understands it. Our eye is meant to live on the surface of the Earth and to see Andromeda as a patch of vague light in the night sky, which is mysterious, even though it's out of focus. But when we get this image from Hubble, we're led to believe that that's what the galaxy really is, and that, oh my God, we've seen it, we've framed it, we've caught it being what it is. But of course, we all know that this very clear, beautiful image is still just as sublime, just as evocative of the infinite, just as mysterious as the night sky, right? Its beauty withdraws from our capacity to understand its meaning. And I think this is because it's a mere three-dimensional image. And the universe itself, space, in fact, appears, or at least every indication, mathematical indication, is that it is more than three-dimensional. That it folds in on itself into a supersensible plane that we can only understand geometrically, that we can't imagine in terms of three-dimensional objects, but must perceive as, well, the very processes which come alive within ourselves. Consciousness, I think, can be described as a higher dimensional phenomenon of space. It's not a what my body is able to do, my real concrete living body is able to do, through the consciousness that I am is only possible because of a fourth dimensional process that can't be seen anywhere in my brain, but that is reflected in the structure and growth and ongoing metabolic activity of my brain and organism. Um, the three-dimensional body is the physical trace of a higher dimensional, you know, I'll call it spiritual process. Maybe there are better words for it, but I think that what we have traditionally understood as spirit has a lot to do with what, in a more contemporary um, scientific way of speaking, is still basically, invisible, material, and that it isn't in three dimensions. It's in higher dimensional space, and its causality exists beyond the mechanistic concepts that define the three-dimensional world. Um, we're dealing with something that's not mechanistic, So to refer to it as spiritual, I think, isn't to invoke a dualism. It's just to say that space is more, um, is wiser, is more alive, more dynamic, and in some ways, until we understand it, occult than we at first might assume. It's not nothing. Space isn't nothing. Space is the fecundity that gave birth to the entire universe, observable universe. It is the source of everything. It is a seething, creative um, flux of infinite energy. Um, so that's my theology. That's my ideology. I invite you to reflect upon it for me, so that I can see it from the outside. Uh, I would very much appreciate your perspective on all this, ContraPoints, or anyone else who has some thoughts. So thanks for listening.